Yes. Oh, okay.
I just looked.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't look like planet Earth, but it's very Earth-like, but it's definitely not planet Earth.
Awesome. Yeah. But then he told me that you can see.
Need some help with power.
Right.
It's a ghost.
Yeah, I don't want to move because I'm already. It took me a while to sit here.
Yeah, plug it in because it says headset power is low.
Yeah, me
Thank you.
and Zach are kind of friends, and yeah, sitting in the same.
Do you know how to go up and down? Franco? No? Yeah, because I'm flying over
Thank you.
the chair. I'm over the table.
Okay, Wasim, where are you?
That's it.
All right, Quinn.
I wish.
Oh, yeah, he's-
guys how.
Hey, G2, we're ready.
You're struggling down there. 'Cause
You're streaming?
Can you see that? Ango is down.
Let's do it. Okay, G2, you're on.
Inside,
I
look.
see you, I see you.
See what
there.
You're Memory 15, right? You're Memory 15, right?
Franco is
Look at to your right.
I'm a bit
Yeah,
drunk.
look to your right.
Someone fell from the stage. You can teletransport yourself. Right.
I don't know.
We lost an astronaut. What? Oh. Yes.
Okay. No, it's, if I click there, I don't know if it's gonna put where it's gonna put me. So I'm
I
gonna.
think it looks more like you now.
All right, you're on. Come to the stage.
Mic is almost safe.
G2.
Thank you, G2. If you make the way to the stage. There he is. Oh, wow. Okay. Carry on.
Franco, go sit down.
Is that Franco? Franco, go sit in this. go sit in
Franco,
the.
go find a place to
Fantastic.
sit. Yeah, good.
All right, G2.
Yeah, come over here and sit down. Fine. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, everyone. Fantastic to see you here. Yay, ISU at Metaverse.
Yay.
Yeah, waving hands. Perfect. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, first of all, everyone in Metaverse, welcome. This historic moment for ISU. We are partnering with Metavisionaries and International Space University today to have our very first lecture in Metaverse. So give it a big shout out first of all. Yay!
Yay!
Fantastic. Okay, so myself, my name is Göktuğ Karacaloğlu, but everybody in the ISU community knows me, G2. I am the director of the Space Studies program of the International Space University, currently happening here in Portugal, Oeiras, and also online virtually around the globe. I'm also in charge of the digital education at ISU. So this is really, really fascinating and very interesting for all of us. It's really historical. So ISU is known for its in-person programs like the Space Studies program. However, we are now moving into virtual education with very high pace. For the last 2 years, we have been designing fully interactive, fully virtual programs, but this is the first time we are taking it to another step. So around this virtual auditorium today, we have 17 participants of the Space Studies program and many others currently watching on their televisions. So today we will hear a lecture from Tara Rutley about the human performance in space. But before that, before handing over to Tara, I really would like to thank Metavisionaries for allowing us to run this virtual event. It's spectacular. Thank you, Metavisionaries, and the CEO of Metavisionaries, Wasim Ahmed. Thank you very, very much on behalf of ISU for giving us this great opportunity and also providing all the virtual reality goggles that we are using for this very event. And also, I would like to thank our very own Jim Green, who is with us in the audience. Jim, thank you very much for allowing us for these wonderful opportunities. All right, so if everybody is ready for the lecture, I would like to hand it over to Tara Rutley, who is a former NASA colleague and also currently the chief scientist of Orbital Reef of Blue Origin. Tara, welcome. It's great to have you here, and the floor is yours. Give her a very warm welcome, please.
Thank you, everybody. How do we shake hands? Shake, shake, shake. I got a little close. Thank you for that. Oh, this is awkward for me as it is for you all, just so you know, and I'm the one here up on stage. Okay.
Come to the center. Come to the center.
I'm going to go to the center. I'm, my proprioception is way off right now. I don't know if you guys are how you're feeling out there. Well, I see someone using the emojis. That's great. Okay. So we just had a conversation. We just had a lecture in real life about the vestibular system. And what I'm going to talk about here is just kind of, I think we're running a little short on time and I want to make sure we all stay on time, but wanted to give you guys kind of an overview of the 3 lecture topics that I'll be talking about this week. You just heard about vestibular. We'll talk a little bit about bone and muscle, and we'll talk a little about the cardiovascular system. What I'm going to do up here is kind of put it into kind of a story. If you think about how all those things work together and what we're doing about those things, challenge ourselves to go further beyond low Earth exploration. So I think what I'll do is start with the vestibular system. Hey, Abdo, you want to pull up the vestibular graphic in her ear? And I'm going to look around to see where it comes because I never know where this is going to show up. Oh, there it is over here. Okay. So you guys, I don't know if you can see it. I'm really close up to it. You're kind of far back, but this is a really cool graphic that we've put together to talk about the vestibular system in space. And now it's really attached to a big ear. So you can kind of see those semicircular canals I talked about. I'm going to try to point, right? I'm getting a little good here. These 3 semicircular canals. Further beyond Earth exploration. Vestibular nerve
so
there.
I think what I'll do is start with the vestibular system. Hey, Abdo, you want to pull up the vestibular
canals we
graphic?
talked about today? They have fluid in them.
I'm going to look around and see where it comes
really
because
cool.
I never know where this is going to show up.
Designed to be in our
there it is,
axes,
over here.
Our X, Y, and Z axes.
So you guys, I don't know if you can see it. I'm really close up to it. You're kind of far back, but this is a really cool graphic that we've put together to talk about the vestibular system in space. And now it's really attached to a big ear. So you can kind of see those semicircular canals.
If you could see
I
them,
talked about, I'm going to try to point, right? I'm getting a little good here. These 3 semicircular canals separated in the ear. So I think I'll do is start with the vestibular system. And about today
and how the body moves around in space and which is essentially just floating around, right? And that things get recalibrated. There's an echo. Oh, there's an echo. They told me to pause while they saw echo. Testing. Someone will let me know to speak. You can hear me. Someone said that there's an echo. Is there an echo?
I don't hear any echo.
Okay, well, if it sounds good to Abdo, everyone else, someone touched me here in real life and said that there's an echo. I'm going to keep talking unless someone comes touches me again and tells me to stop. Hopefully you can all hear me. Yes?
Perfect.
That's perfect. Please continue. Okay, great. So really what we talked about today was the way the body adapts to the new spaceflight environment. That's an important thing the body is really good at doing. And that's the point is to use it or lose it, right? The body needs to change to meet the needs of its new environment. The challenge becomes when the astronauts are in space for so long and then they come back into an environment that has a gravitational vector. Those semicircular canals aren't as sensitive as the otoliths that we talked about. The otoliths are the things that provide a biggest challenge for us, as well as what we talked about, the sensory inputs from things at the bottom of the feet, or where your muscles and your tendons are in space, and where you're looking in your eyes. So in this room, we may seem like we're in space, but we are actually here on Earth. And so we still feel gravity. Things aren't upside down for us. Although some of you might feel like you might be getting a little motion sick. My daughter does when she puts these headsets on. You're in one place, so it might not be too bad, but it's a bit of a conflict of motion and a bit of sensory conflicts. And so that was the vestibular system. There are things that we're doing on Earth in the labs at the Johnson Space Center to try to challenge that system. All those inputs, crew goes into space, and we're thinking about what we could do with the crew in space. And then, of course, when this crew gets back, we go through rehabilitation. But the whole point here is, what can we do to keep the crew healthy in space so that when they get to the next place, which is Moon or Mars, that they don't have any issues with their balance, their posture. You don't want any pain points. And we want them to be able to be fully functional, especially as we go back to the moon and we stay longer than we stayed for Apollo. But it's not just the vestibular system that has a challenge. This afternoon, I'll talk about bone muscle. Hey, Yabdo, how's that? Where's that guy with the puffy face and the bone, the guy, the model that, let's bring that graphic up. There we go. This guy right here is kind of funny looking. Maybe one day we'll make him less funny looking, but a normal human being, but you notice there's some changes happening here. And so this afternoon, we'll talk about changes to the body's musculoskeletal system. In that, again, when you don't have that gravity vector and the body's really good at using, using you're losing, right? But it doesn't need, it'll get rid of. You see that happening with bones and muscles. Now, the bones and muscles are designed here on Earth to move us around, keep us upright against gravity. They get us from one place to another. But in space, when you don't have that gravity vector and see the astronauts are just kind of floating around, they don't need to use the bones for sure. And there's not that much muscle movement. There are different muscle movements. So our astronauts tend to, what you're seeing is him looking like he's getting smaller. If we don't do something to keep the bones and muscles challenged, those bones and muscles will deteriorate. And what you see here is an exaggeration of something called atrophy, muscle atrophy. And so we do things such as exercise countermeasures on space station. How about we bring up the treadmill and the bike, Abdo? There we go. This guy's on a bike. So the bike is designed for the cardiovascular system, and we'll talk more about the cardiovascular system. I think on July 8th is when my next lecture is. But it challenges the heart, and the heart is a muscle. The heart needs to pump as well, the blood around. And oh, hey, there's the treadmill guy. So we also have a treadmill in space. This is not the space treadmill. In space, this treadmill actually has bungee cords attached to the shoulders so that it keeps you, held down onto the treadmill. But the treadmill provides a couple important things for bone and muscles. One, every time his foot hits the ground, the heels. And that load is important for bones. Bones need loads to stay healthy. We'll talk about that this afternoon. Every heel strike means a good load to the bone, and it keeps it in good shape. The treadmill also keeps the muscle, again, at least the bungee down on the treadmill. So there's some actual exercise activities that are being done here. And of course, both the bike and the treadmill are important for the heart, which is also a muscle. It's a pump. And if the heart doesn't have to pump so hard against gravity, it's a muscle and it will weaken. We don't want that to happen for reasons we'll talk about later in the week. The third exercise equipment that we have on station that you don't see here is a resistive exercise device. This is kind of like a weightlifting machine, but because there are no weights that are weight in space, we have mass but not weight. Well, you can't really lift weights, right? So you could use springs, you could use rubber bands, but NASA wanted something that didn't increase its force as you stretched it, like a rubber band does, or a spring. They wanted something called constant force. So the resistive exercise device that we have on the International Space Station is a device that is vacuum powered. The vacuum of space provides the resistance for which the astronauts can do weightlifting machines, exercises. And that is important. Weightlifting has, as we found, and we'll talk about this afternoon, is one of the most important things we can do now to combat bone and muscle loss in space. talk about more about bone and muscle loss this afternoon. But the third component that I wanted to talk about was the heart, the cardiovascular system. Let's bring that one up, Abdo. We have a pretty cool heart. Maybe the heart will go in the front. I don't know. There it is. It's in the front. So I'll walk up to here. So we've got a really cool image of a beating heart. So this is what your heart looks like, mostly. Not that Valentine heart we're all used to. It's got 4 chambers where the blood enters from the lungs into the right chamber, in the right atrium and ventricle, the right chambers. And then there's 2 chambers on the left that the blood pumps out. The blood that will actually go to the body that has oxygen. The heart receives oxygenated blood and then sends blood right back around the heart, the body again. Heart is a pump. It's a muscle. It's got to send, and we'll talk about in details next week. But it's got to send lots of fluid all the way around the body, including the head and the feet. And in space, on Earth, most of our fluid is pulled actually close to our lower limbs because of the gravity vector. In space, that changes. In space, the fluid gets more distributed to the torso and head because there's no gravity pulling down. Because it gets distributed to the torso and the head, there are receptors in the torso and the head that say, whoa, that's too much pressure. You don't need all this fluid. And your body starts dumping fluid through urination. So now you become relatively dehydrated, but this is the new state of hydration for a space flight, which is acceptable. But the heart doesn't now have as much blood to pump, and it surely doesn't have to pump against gravity. So as a heart muscle, it could get weak. As a muscle, it could get weak. And we have seen that as a fact. So that would be, think about that for space flight. Okay, maybe this is acceptable as long as it doesn't affect the electrical function of the heart. But think about when we come back to Earth, when we go to the moon after a 9-month mission to Mars, we go back to a gravitational environment again. We want a heart that is not weak. We want the most optimal state of cardiac health. So we want this muscle to be strong. And so again, that's why we go back to the exercise equipment that I mentioned, the treadmill and the exercise device. Been able to keep our heart, the astronaut's heart, pretty healthy as far as we can tell so far after decades of work on the International Space Station. These 3 systems are what we're going to talk about this week and a lot more in detail.
I think she got disconnected. So they put until she comes.
I'm back. Sometimes we just glitch out. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, welcome back,
All right.
Tara.
Sometimes out in real life too, but I don't disappear. Anyway, my brain, it's time for lunch. So I believe that's it. I just covered, we'll talk more in detail about these 3 systems. And I want you to think of the body as a story. I want you, if you're an engineer right now and you're designing something for spaceflight, what I want you to do is think about what you're going to learn about the human body this week and how we're a very complicated system. And no matter what vehicle we build, what kind of engineering marvel, the human body is going to have to overcome quite a bit to be able to do really fantastic things like explore further than low Earth orbit. And with that, I don't know what happens next. Jim, do you come on up or do we take questions? Or are we interactive?
Okay. So hi, Tara. This is a fantastic overview of what happens to the body. And we ought to also talk about how NASA is planning to go to Mars and how they use the space station to be able to perform some tests that will inform us how the body will change very long to Moon and then on to Mars. And that brings up what we think is a wonderful test called the twin study. What's the twin study all about?
Okay, so Jim cut out a little bit, but he asked, what is the NASA twin study all
Tara,
about?
What's the twin study all about? Yeah.
Okay, can you hear Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
So
go ahead.
the twin study was a very fortunate thing that we had a set of twins in the astronaut office at NASA. And that's Mark Kelly and Scott Kelly. And they both flew for a few years separately. Mark retired, but Scott stayed on. And when it was decided that Scott was going to be our 1-year astronaut, he was going to be our person to spend 1 year in space. It was going to be a pretty big experiment in itself, just staying for 1 year. One of the scientists, colleagues at JSC said, "Hey, man, he's got a twin. Why don't we take the opportunity to do another set of studies?" And at first, people thought, "Oh my gosh, really?" It wasn't really something that was in the beginning very thought of. And then he was like, "Well, yeah, we should." And everybody agreed that would be an important thing. I mean, not very often you have a identical control that will be on Earth. So the twin studies is a study that consisted of 10 research teams, and they looked at the differences between Scott Kelly and Mark Kelly throughout some of the physiological systems throughout Scott's time in space. Scott stayed in space for almost a year. By the way, Scott was not the first person to stay in space that long. It was just the first person that we've been able to collect data, and this was a very intentional plan. So since Scott, we've got some really good data off of Scott. We've sent a couple of other people to space for almost a year as well.
Fantastic opportunity. And then, of course, the results are very physical in the sense that when Scott Kelly returns to the Earth, he can go through a battery of tests. They can take his blood, they can look at his genes, they can see what's happened in terms of his telomeres. They can also look at his immune. So this is a perfect opportunity then to make these kind of measurements, because these are the things that we would expect to happen on long trips going Mars. Now, one of the things that I thought was really fantastic with the twin study was his immune system changes. So, for instance, when Scott Kelly returned to Earth, his immune system appeared to be much older as an older adult, and would be as a late 40s, early 50-year-old man. And so consequently, that was really bizarre. We didn't know what happened in space that allowed him to lose his immune system. But over time, it came back. And so now we have an opportunity to really study these things, because these things help humans here on Earth. If we can repair immune systems, then have an opportunity for elderly in particular to be able to regain the capability of their body to protect themselves against a variety of things, including viruses. So what are the other things that were studied in the twins comparison, Tara? So here's a couple charts that have been NASA that everyone has an opportunity to look at.
Whoa, nicely done, Abdo. These are beautifully done. Okay, so you guys have two sets of flyers in front of you. If you take a look at the one that looks like let's start with the one on the left. It looks like a bunch of squares. I think this is pretty cool because what this does is shows all the involvement and the stats from the twin study in space. We had 10 research teams across 8 states that did studies, almost a year's worth of 340 days in space. We had 10 different investigations, and I'll just give an overview of those shortly. 36 cognition tests. Some of you asked me after the lecture this morning about psychology and cognition. There were tests done on Scott. And then it's interesting, Scott saw 12 humans in 1 year. Those were those folks who visited the space station, but you can imagine his men on the ground saw way more than that. We have 285 biological samples combined across both Scott and Mark. There were 183 blood, specifically from the blood. And over 10 billion miles of DNA, Kelly. So the 84 researchers across this group came together and actually, it took about a year and a half or two to analyze their data before finally shared some of the results that was now published in Science. And if you look to your right, these are some of the results on this pinwheel looking chart. These are charts that NASA put together. If you go to the nasa.gov page or you just Google NASA study, you'll be able to learn a lot much more in detail here. But you can see that, yes, the immune system was studied in space. What was found was that when Scott returned, he had about 7% of his genome associated was changed, actually. And so some of the immune system functions, although symptomatically, we saw some changes in gene expression associated with the immune system. Interestingly, though, Scott was given a flu vaccine as a good challenge to his immune system before spaceflight, while he was in space, and then after as well. And it turns out that the flu vaccine worked the same on him before, during, and after a mission, according to the blood work test that they did. So in space, it seemed his immune system responded as we would expect. There are changes to the immune system in general, all flyers in space. For Scott, some of those remained elevated for 6 months of data that was collected. And so there was some hypersensitivities is what was called, according to the gene expression in his immune system. Scott's body mass did decrease in space. But his folate status increased, and that's probably because of the nutrition and exercise that we give our crew members. So this is a really good news. His body mass decreased, which is what we would expect. You can either decrease a little bit or maintain. It wasn't significant enough. So nutrition and exercise, you'll hear about this afternoon, are important. Let's see. Yep, Scott's carotid artery, which you'll hear about for the cardiovascular system, is an important artery that leaves the heart. It takes a big amount of blood first. It tended to thicken in space. And we're not quite sure how that, why or how that happens, but it did happen. It didn't seem to have a functional effect. The functional effect is what astronauts are what scientists are really looking at. The gut bacteria looked pretty good in both subjects. Was able to be maintained in space. And then the telomeres are end caps of the DNA or the chromosomes that protect the DNA every time you get a replication event. And as we get older, and every time we get replication, the telomeres actually get shorter. But that's just expected, and they get shorter throughout your life. For whatever reasons, telomeres tended to lengthen in space, not shorten. That was a shocking surprise. I remember when I came. The researchers at Colorado State University are still investigating this one, but they returned to normal really quickly among landing again. Let's see. Cognition, I would say most of Scott's cognitive functions were unchanged, although speed and accuracy did decline after landing. Question about that they're still, they're saying, well, maybe he had a busy schedule, or maybe it wasn't effective space flight. That part is not really yet known. And then, yes, something important to know that is Scott's DNA did not change in space, but what changed was gene expression. That's what changed in space. We saw some genes that were turned on that you would see consistent with radiation exposure, but also with stressful environments that we see here on Earth, such as scuba diving or mountain hiking. And so that was pretty expected. Fortunately, things returned to Earth, to normal when he returned to Earth. And then I think that's probably there are more to it. Each one of these 10 studies have its own obvious details that you can dive deeper into. The good news in the overall news is Scott and Mark, yes, there were changes between the two environments. You can imagine their environments were so different for a year. Kelly ate whatever he wanted to eat. Kelly was on a prescription of food and exercise that were best for space flight. And then, any changes that we saw seem to be able to return to normal on Earth. However, I know Scott wrote a book. I have not read it. Maybe you have, Jim, but I heard stories like where, Scott's skin was super sensitive when he got home, returned to Earth, and wearing clothes.
Yeah,
was painful for him up to a certain extent.
Right. If feet in particular seem to be incredibly sensitive and swollen and many times. All right. Well, this is a fantastic opportunity to see if there's any questions. Let's spend a few minutes answering questions. See how well that works in this framework. Please bring your hands up. Peter, you had your hand up. Do you have a question? And then unmute yourself. Okay, very good. Up here. Right over here, Tara. There she is. She's got her hand up. Yeah.
Oh, cowboy hat. It's up here.
It's up here. Unmute yourself.
Yes, Abdo will have. I think Abdo will have to unmute her.
Okay. I think I'm unmuted. I think I'm unmuted. Who first?
All right. We'll come back to her. Okay, we have a question over here. Harry?
Should I start?
Go ahead.
I mean, if you hear me,
they can't do
I
it.
can just pose the question.
Yes, I can hear you. Yep, go ahead.
Can you give more information on the epigenetics, please?
Well, let's see. More information
on which? More information on what? On the epigenetics. Here in the epigenetics. What were the epigenetic changes when they were compared with Mark's?
Oh, they were just mostly those associated with stress markers, things that they were similar to Mark's on Earth. So there wasn't anything super intriguing there. It seemed that Scott's body was able to really adapt. And I mean, there weren't any significant differences, at least not to my knowledge. So the way that DNA, the way the genes expressed were expected in that environment.
Okay. Felipa had a question.
Sapir sent me a message. Can you talk about Scoot ADHD? Scott, does Scott have ADHD? I think she must mean Scott. Scott's ADHD? I don't know about that. I don't know that Scott.
I don't either.
Is he? Is that the message, Sapir? Is that what you were? Yeah, she's waving over here. She sent me a message because I think she can't speak, but I don't know anything about Scott's ADHD.
Okay. Felipa had a question. We're here in the center. Felipa, can you speak? Unmute yourself.
Yes, unmute yourself and just ask.
I can speak now. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can just barely hear you. Go ahead. State your question clearly.
I think so, yeah. I think so. So, unmute yourself. I have unmuted myself. Okay. So, my question is a bit of a loaded question, I think. Basically, I was wondering if there are any theological studies that have been in space or not.
Oh, the women, yes. So they do look at women in space. I have a really good graphic that I usually use, and yeah. Are you asking about women and women's differences in space than men?
Yes.
yes, there have been different studies. So I'm trying to remember. So women, I think there's a difference between men in speed and accuracy when you're doing things like cognition tests between men and women. And there's also a difference in the eyesight issues that are being seen on orbit. For some reason, the men seem to have, there's a more prevalent incident of men having eyesight challenges that some women are getting, but not as many. And that might have something to do with the way that women's vascular system responds to spaceflight. There are some differences there. There are some differences in orthostatic tolerance or the ability for women to be less likely to faint when they return. They're actually more likely to faint. In the old days when crew members were having these challenges of syncope from space flight, their cardiovascular systems were so challenged that they had to be loaded off with help, or they would stand up after a long stay and just pass out because of the way the fluid distribution happens. And we'll talk about that in my lecture next week. But women seem to be more susceptible to that kind of thing. But it's not something that happens that often these days, for sure. But other than that, there's not, the big one would be bone. Women seem to be more sensitive to the bone changes than men, especially at certain ages. Other than that, though, there don't seem to be that many changes that I can think of off the top of my head. There is a really good visual out there. There are many studies that have been done, and there's a really good graphic. If you simply Google men and women and changes in space, it's a really neat graphic, just like what's in front of you, that talks about all the changes. But it's not that. I think women are more susceptible to kidney stones because of the bone changes too. There are many studies that
where you can get together. It is spectacular to be able to have an opportunity to try a new venue and indeed practice all aspects of it. And that includes not only a lecture, but our interactive 3D nature of the heart and vestibular systems and everything that you've heard about so far. And then, of course, answer your wonderful questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Wasim to close out the ceremony. So thank you very much, students.
So fantastic. So thank you so much for everybody being part of this. So now what we're going to do is have a special song that we created for this particular part, and we're going to play that for you to all enjoy. And feel free then to follow up with us for any